Republicans are looking at taking full control of the U.S. government after Donald Trump's historic win and flipping at least 3 states to take the Senate. Right now, Mr. Trump's party is just 10 votes shy of a majority in the House of Representatives. And there is reason for Republican hope that it has already gained 4 seats, that it will retain control of that chamber. Meanwhile, growing speculation over who will make it onto the Trump cabinet come 2025. Some of the names being tossed around include those who played significant roles in his first term. Amongst them, that's Robert Lighthizer. He's a former U.S. trade representative, a key figure in the trade war with China. There's also Mike Pompeo, former CIA director and Secretary of State. Mike Waltz, a Florida congressman, has been pushing China-related bills, including one meant to reduce reliance on critical minerals that are mined in China. 2 other key names likely to play official roles in the next Trump administration are Tesla and ex-CEO Elon Musk, the president-elect's richest and most prominent donor, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who dropped his own presidential bid to endorse Mr. Trump. On the other side, President Joe Biden is scheduled to address the nation tonight around 11 a.m. U.S. time. That's midnight Singapore, Hong Kong time. A defeated Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, delivered her concession speech this morning. She promised to help ensure the transition of power would be smooth. And while Democrats might still be reeling, Senator Bernie Sanders says it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned the working class should find it has been abandoned by the working class. He adds the American people are angry and want change. More Simon Marks joins us live from Washington, D.C. Simon, Bernie Sanders has his reason why we saw the election results that we saw just yesterday. But for now, what are the reasons that are prominent for what went wrong for the Democrats?
Well, look, Wei Su, in many ways, that Bernie Sanders statement is the opening salvo in what is now going to be an internecine battle of recrimination within the Democratic Party. The senator from Vermont there identifying the collapse of working class support for the Democratic Party, but there was a collapse in a whole variety of other areas. Latino support surged to Donald Trump. The support of both older white males and women surged to Donald Trump. This was a comprehensive repudiation of the message that the Democratic Party was presenting in this election by an array of voters that previously had been in the party's corner. There are questions, of course, about President Joe Biden's decision not to fulfill his promise to be a transitional figure in the United States, not to hand over earlier to a younger generation of leaders and to allow them at the very least to have an open primary about a year and a half that would have battle-tested not just Kamala Harris, but perhaps other Democrats that might have at the time challenged her for the party's presidential nomination. There are questions about the role of Democratic Party grandees, including the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, and even tacitly the Obamas, who encouraged the party to believe that it was stuck with Joe Biden as a candidate. And then, of course, there are Joe Biden's supporters who say that Kamala Harris's loss just goes to show if he had remained the candidate, he might still have secured a second term in office. In other words, he was, they think, a stronger candidate than his own vice president. So the recriminations are going to take a good long while, not only to play out, but for that younger generation of Democrats to come through and to be given a chance now to say, this is now our party and we want open discussion about the direction that it's taking.
All right, until that new generation, I suppose, takes the helm of power in the Democratic Party, let's look at the Republican Party. Now, what names are likely to make it to this new administration that will determine the tone as well as the policies we will see being executed under Mr. Trump in his second term?
It's an absolutely key question. And if you want to understand the direction that the second Trump administration is going to take, it is going to be through a close identification of his cabinet nominees. So we already think that there is a chance that Robert Lighthizer is going to become his economic advisor. Donald Trump on the campaign trail a few days ago described the word tariffs as the most beautiful word in the English language. It was largely Mr. Lighthizer, as US trade representative, who brought that word to Donald Trump's attention. So if indeed he plays a senior role, that indicates a further hardening of the country's position on trade, especially vis-a-vis China, but other countries as well. I mean, there are questions about Elon Musk. It would be difficult for him to go into the cabinet because he would have to divest himself of business, but he'd be able to get Senate approval now, which was previously considered a problem. Mike Pompeo tipped as a possible future defense secretary heading the Pentagon. I would say the biggest space to look at is the vacancy for Secretary of State. Is there a chance that Donald Trump is going to nominate the former US ambassador to Germany, Rick Grenell, one of the most far-right figures in the firmament, as Secretary of State? Keep an eye on that one.
All right, thanks for that, Simon Marks. We will be keeping an eye on all these appointments, reporting live there from Washington, D.C. Well, appointments will be shaping domestic policies, but also in foreign policy, there's scrutiny over what Mr. Trump might plan for foreign relations, in particular how he will deal with ongoing wars in both Ukraine and the Middle East. Standing by to look at what a second Trump presidency might mean for foreign policy, our correspondents Megumi Lim in Kiev and Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Megumi, let's start with you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was very quick, one of the very first, in fact, to congratulate Mr. Trump and echoing Mr. Trump's line that there could be a return to peace through strength. Are people viewing this as Mr. Zelensky trying to persuade Mr. Trump to stand by Kyiv in its fight against Russia?
Well, first of all, it goes without saying that the U.S. elections was watched very, very closely by President Zelensky and his staff. A lot is at stake, as we know. And so it was no surprise that President Zelensky was one of the first world leaders to congratulate Donald Trump. You can almost see him mirroring Trump's language in his congratulatory post that he posted on X. He said things like they had a great meeting in September. But despite what Trump has said in the past about Ukraine, about Zelensky himself, he's called Zelensky the greatest salesman, and also even blamed Zelensky for starting the war. President Zelensky simply cannot afford to upset Trump. Again, a lot is at stake here. So if you look at the congratulatory post that Zelensky wrote, you can see that he's made the effort to really frame the war not in the perspective of what Ukraine needs, but instead highlighting Trump's strength. He said, quote, "I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength approach in global affairs." He said this is exactly the principle that can practically bring just peace in Ukraine closer. Now, the phrase peace through strength, this was used by former Republican President Ronald Reagan. He was someone who was very hawkish towards Moscow. So you can see that this is Zelensky trying to bring back memories of that. Now, Zelensky also emphasized in his post that Ukraine is not a charity case, but worth the investment from the United States, worth the partnership. He said, quote, "We are interested in developing a mutually beneficial political and economic cooperation that will benefit both our nations." He said Ukraine, as one of Europe's strongest military powers, is committed to ensuring long-term peace and security in Europe and the transatlantic community. So yes, Ukraine needs help. Yes, Ukraine is fighting for its survival, but he's saying that Ukraine's survival is of value to the United States.
Even so, Megumi, what you mentioned, Kyiv cannot afford to do without aid from the United States. Europe has certainly stepped up providing aid in this war to Ukraine, but as a single country, the US has still been the biggest contributor. How critical is this need from Kyiv, both for weapons as well as financial aid?
Well, Ukraine is certainly stepping into the unknown, and the Biden administration knows that it is rushing to get $9 billion worth of remaining aid to Ukraine before Trump takes the White House. And let's not forget what's happening on the battlefield. Russian forces are making slow but steady gains in Ukraine's east, and also we've already seen confirmation both by Ukrainian and U.S. officials that North Korean soldiers have already joined the fight in Russia's Kursk region against Ukrainian forces. So Ukraine is not up against not only one country but two countries. Now, even though there is a lot of uncertainty, we've also seen a level of cautious optimism here. This is how Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal described the situation today. You know, many people, although grateful for the support that Ukraine has received under the Biden administration, has also been growing increasingly frustrated over the support that's been mired by delays in weapons deliveries, delays in approving certain types of weapons for Ukraine, and also hesitation in approving certain policies, things like long-range strikes. So some are saying that maybe Trump may bring some kind of positive change, but again, we really don't know. So again, Ukraine is really headed for uncertain times here.
Thanks for that. Megumi reporting live there from Kiev. And Giles, Gibson in Tel Aviv, another leader who rushed to congratulate Mr. Trump on his election victory was the Israeli Prime Minister. What did they discuss, and what does Mr. Trump's win in these elections mean for Israel and the wider Middle East?
That's right. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has said that the two men had a roughly 20-minute discussion, describing the tone of that general discussion as warm and cordial, and saying that in particular they discussed working together to shore up Israel's security, and also they discussed what's described by the Israeli Prime Minister's office as the Iranian threat. There is no doubt, really, that this relationship between these two men goes back many years, and it's also gone up and down over the course of those years. During the first Trump administration, when I was actually reporting from Washington, D.C., we saw Donald Trump giving concessions to the Israelis that really no previous president had been prepared to give, such as moving the US Embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. But then we saw a bit of a breakdown in that relationship around about the 2020 election, when we saw Benjamin Netanyahu recognizing Joe Biden's victory in that election, at the same time as Donald Trump was still insisting that he had won and not Joe Biden. The general consensus here in the region is that the incoming Trump administration is going to give Benjamin Netanyahu just a freer hand in terms of his tactics, his strategy when it comes to these overlapping conflicts in the Middle East. But at the same time, critics of Benjamin Netanyahu say that that freer hand is actually going to lead to tensions rising even higher across the region.
Oh, thanks. So that was Megumi Lim in Kiev and Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Of course, anxiety and relative relief for both Ukraine and Israel, given what's happening there, the ongoing conflicts.